Harrison Cole arrived at the cemetery before sunrise, the way he had every year since the funeral, early enough that no one would see him, early enough that grief could remain a private thing instead of a performance for onlookers. This year, someone had beaten him there. Two small figures knelt at his son's headstone in the gray half-light, heads bowed, hands folded with a practiced familiarity that told Harrison, before he'd even gotten close enough to see their faces clearly, that this was not their first visit. Identical, maybe 5 years old. Twin girls, kneeling at Nathan Cole's grave as if they had every right to be there. Time seemed to stand still as Harrison stood frozen at the edge of the gravel path, 61 years old, and utterly unprepared for the sight in front of him. To understand why the sight of those girls hit Harrison like a physical blow, you have to understand what the years since Nathan's death had actually looked like. Harrison Cole had built Cole Industrial from a single machine shop into a manufacturing conglomerate worth $1.8 billion, a fortune assembled through relentless, single-minded discipline. The same discipline that had, if he was honest, kept him at arm's length from his only son for most of Nathan's 26 years. Nathan died in a highway accident, struck by a drunk driver on a rain-slicked overpass at just 26 years old, 3 years earlier. Harrison had processed the loss the only way he knew how, by working longer hours, not fewer. 80-hour weeks became 90. He told himself the company needed him. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. Grief, unlike a quarterly earnings report, had no clear metric he knew how to manage, so he'd simply refused to sit still long enough to feel it. Harrison approached slowly, gravel crunching under his shoes, and the bolder of the two girls looked up first, entirely unafraid. "Are you his friend too?" she asked, tilting her head toward the headstone. "Something like that," Harrison managed. "What are your names?" "I'm Mia. This is Grace, my sister. We're twins." She said it with the practiced pride of a child who'd explained the concept many times. "We come every Sunday. Mommy says it's important to say thank you, even if the person can't hear you anymore. We say it anyway." Harrison's throat tightened around a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "Thank you for what, sweetheart?" Mia shrugged, the way children do when the true weight of something hasn't yet occurred to them. "Mommy says I'll understand when I'm bigger." "Who taught you to come here?" Harrison asked, crouching to their level. "Who brings you?" Both girls turned in unison and pointed toward the cemetery gate, where a woman stood at a deliberate distance, close enough to watch, far enough to stay out of the conversation unless summoned. She was perhaps 31, dressed in simple scrubs, her expression caught somewhere between dread and a resolve she'd clearly been building toward for a long time. She didn't look away when Harrison met her eyes. She didn't approach either. She simply stood there, watching him watch her, as though she'd rehearsed this exact moment 100 times and still wasn't certain she was ready for it. Harrison walked toward her, leaving the girls to their prayers, his pulse loud enough in his ears to nearly drown out the morning birdsong. "I'm Harrison Cole," he said. "That's my son's grave." "I know," the woman said quietly. "I'm Renee Alvarez. I'm a pediatric nurse at Grantham Children's Hospital." She hesitated. "I've brought my daughters here every Sunday for over a year. I never approached you, or left a note, or any sign of who I was. I told myself it wasn't the right time. I'm not sure there ever would have been one." "Why do they come?" Harrison asked, though something in his chest already suspected the answer was going to reorganize the rest of his life. Renee took a slow breath, the kind people take before stepping off a ledge they've been standing on for a long time. "You don't know who I am," she said. "And I need to explain something I've put off explaining for far too long. There are two parts to it. I need you to hear both before you say anything." Harrison nodded, bracing without knowing exactly what he was bracing for. "The first part," Renee said, "is that your son saved my daughter's life." Renee explained it slowly, giving Harrison time to absorb each piece. Mia had been born with a fatal congenital heart defect, hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition that, without intervention, would have taken her life before her second birthday. At 18 months old, Mia's condition deteriorated into acute heart failure, and she was placed on the emergency transplant registry with a prognosis measured in days, not weeks. A donor heart became available that same week, matched anonymously through the regional organ registry, the way most transplants are, with no names exchanged, no contact between families. The surgery saved Mia's life. It wasn't until months later, working a shift at the same hospital where the transplant coordinator's records crossed her desk during an unrelated case, that Renee saw the donor's name listed in a hospital foundation newsletter honoring organ donors. Nathan Cole, 26 years old, died the same week as Mia's transplant, having signed his donor card as a college freshman 8 years earlier, never imagining how soon it would matter. Harrison's knees nearly buckled at the first truth alone. Renee wasn't finished. "There's a second part," Renee said, and her voice for the first time began to shake. "It's harder to say than the first." She explained that she and Nathan had dated, briefly and quietly, in the months before his death, a relationship neither family had ever known about, ended not by conflict, but by the ordinary drift of two young people who'd lost touch after Nathan took an extended work assignment overseas. Weeks after they'd stopped speaking, Renee discovered she was pregnant. "Grace is his daughter," Renee said. "Mia's twin sister, your granddaughter. I found out I was pregnant after we'd already lost contact, and by the time I worked up the courage to reach out, I learned—" Her voice cracked completely. "I learned he'd already died. I didn't know how to walk into a grieving family's life with a secret relationship and an unplanned pregnancy. So I didn't. I raised them both alone instead." The full shape of it landed on Harrison all at once, each piece detonating before the last had fully registered. One granddaughter, Mia, carrying his son's donated heart inside her small chest, keeping Nathan alive, quite literally, in the most physical sense a human body allows. The other, Grace, carrying his son's blood, a grandchild he never knew existed, conceived in the final months of a life that had ended before either of them could know she was coming. Something inside him buckled that he thought had gone numb years ago. Harrison sat down hard on the cemetery grass, not gracefully, not with any of the composure that had carried him through decades of boardrooms, his hands pressed flat against the earth, as though the ground itself might be the only thing capable of holding him up. "Say that again," he managed. "Please, say all of it again." Once the initial shock passed, Harrison needed to understand, not to challenge her, but because the silence itself had cost her as much as it had cost him. "I was 29, grieving and completely alone," Renee explained. "I had no claim on a billionaire family's attention, and I was terrified that showing up with a pregnancy claim would look like I was trying to extract money, not tell the truth. I raised both girls on a nurse's salary, $68,000 a year, because it felt safer than risking being seen as someone chasing a fortune instead of grieving a man I'd actually loved." "You could have told me the moment Mia's transplant happened," Harrison said, not accusatory, just trying to understand. "I almost did, every single week for a year," Renee admitted. "I just kept telling myself I needed one more Sunday to work up the courage. I'm sorry it took this long." Harrison, once the initial shock steadied into something more deliberate, made one request, gently and without a trace of distrust in his voice. "I believe you," he said. "But for Grace's sake, And for the legal reality of what this means for her, I'd like a paternity test. Not because I doubt you, because she deserves it documented beyond question. Renee agreed immediately, visibly relieved to finally have the truth confirmed by something beyond her own 2 years of private certainty. "I've wanted this confirmed for a long time," she said. "I just never had a reason strong enough to ask for it myself." The test results arrived 12 days later. 99.98% probability of paternity. Grace Alvarez was, beyond any legal or biological doubt, Nathan Cole's daughter. Harrison read the letter 3 times in his office, alone. The same office where he'd once signed billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. This single piece of paper undid him more completely than any of them ever had. 2 little girls, one carrying his son's heart, one carrying his son's blood, were now, by extraordinary coincidence, and one woman's quiet courage, permanently woven into whatever remained of his family. Harrison didn't try to overwhelm the girls with wealth. He'd learned, watching Nathan grow up mostly through nannies and scheduled visits, exactly what not to repeat. Instead, he simply started showing up. Sunday cemetery visits alongside Renee and the twins, then birthday parties, then ordinary Tuesday dinners that had no occasion attached to them at all. He learned Mia's favorite color and Grace's fear of thunderstorms. He sat through kindergarten graduation in a folding chair instead of sending a representative the way the old Harrison certainly would have. "I wasn't present enough for Nathan," he told Renee one evening. "I don't intend to make that mistake twice." Within a year, Harrison established the Nathan Cole Memorial Fund, structured around 2 commitments: a scholarship program for first-generation college students, and, more personally, a fund covering organ transplant costs for families who couldn't afford the gap insurance left behind, ensuring no parent would face the specific terror Renee once faced watching Mia's condition decline without knowing how they'd pay for the surgery that might save her. The fund had, within its first 18 months, covered transplant-related costs for 41 families. Quietly, without press attention, Harrison could have easily generated, but chose not to seek. It began with a single, quiet act of foresight. A 19-year-old college freshman signing a donor card years before he could have imagined needing it, thinking little of it beyond the 5 minutes it took to fill out the form. That decision rippled forward further than Nathan Cole ever could have known. Into a dying toddler's chest, into a father's collapse on cemetery grass, into 2 little girls who now have more family than either of them realized they were owed. Harrison Cole learned at 61 that loss and continuation can occupy the exact same grave. That grief doesn't always end where a headstone begins. And sometimes, if you're willing to kneel down and ask the right question, it simply continues in a form you never expected to meet.